Okay, yeah. Hey, thanks everybody who showed up this morning. I guess there's some folks from Toronto who showed up at 10 a.m., which isn't as early as some of the folks here in Alberta, but really appreciate you coming on. I'm very excited about this webinar specifically. Mimi and I have gone through the practice run, and she's got some really great stuff. So, Mimi, I'm really excited to have you here. And of course, we have Mark here too. I'll just do a bit of an intro here, and then I'm going to throw it over to you, Mark, and I'll get you to introduce Mimi yourself.
Love
Anyways, the Calgary Marketing Association, really the vision here is to make Calgary known as a world-class marketing community, help educate folks on some of the great work and celebrating the great work that we're doing here in the blue sky city known as Calgary. And we have a lot of events coming up actually pretty soon, including one next month that's going to be an in-person event. I believe it's going to be at Earl Grey Golf Club. We're still solidifying the details here, and we should have tickets up for sale later this week. An email will go out if you've signed up for the newsletter. That'll link to that event here. But yeah, we're going to do a marketing ROI panel here with Jeff Nelson from Enduro, Steph Simmons from Marks, Amanda Thomas from Construct Digital, and Jeremy Kitson from Vovia. Really excited about that. It's on May 13th, so save the date. And details and ticket sales will go online. I'm going to say Thursday because that's when the email will go out. And then, of course, we have the podcast. We're still running. I think we're on episode 6 now, which is, I guess that'd be a record for lots of marketing podcasts. But we're looking for guests. So if you're a CMA member and you have something you want to celebrate, maybe an awesome campaign that you want to show off a case study for, or if you have some insight that you would like to share, we'd love to have you on. You can email myself at communications@calgarycma.com, and then we could set that up and you can chat with Mark and myself on Spotlight. And if you haven't heard Spotlight, here's the QR code. Just scan that QR code and you can hear it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And then just a little teaser here. In June, we're having Creativity Week, and that's being brought to you by Daughter Creative. Really excited. We're doing a lot of different things in person. We're going to have some a daily webinar, which is very exciting. Especially if you know what Mimi and I were trying to go through with the Zoom links and the trouble we went through to get this webinar going. This is going to be a very exciting time for us. So, and there's going to be some other events happening there, including workshops. So, really excited about that. But we'll be talking about that later on here. And then the last thing we want to do is just thank our corporate partners. Without them, we wouldn't be able to run these webinars. So thank you so much to all of them. I won't say all their names, but they're right here on the screen. And yeah, thanks again for supporting us and helping us run these events and pushing out content and so on and so forth. So really appreciate your support. And now I'm going to throw it over to Mark here, who's going to introduce Mimi. So take it away, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. And yeah, welcome everybody. I'm very excited to have Mimi join. We met for my podcast a few months ago now, I think it was, talking about promise of the customer research, which is from the LinkedIn B2B Institute. So if anybody hasn't heard of that, feel free to take a look at online for that. There's tons of great information. But anyway, having met her through that, I just was fascinated by the way she thinks, and she's obviously brilliant. And she's then mentioned she's got some new research specific to the B2B and buying group. And would we be interested in chatting about that? And so I thought it would be a great conversation because B2B buying is so fascinating. And then and selling and marketing and all that kind of thing. But having someone from the B2B Institute that is sharing insights on the research they've done in specifically this area, it was such a great opportunity. I couldn't pass it up. So Mimi, thanks for joining us. You're the head of marketplace innovation at the B2B Institute, or for LinkedIn in general. Formerly the head of EMEA in Latin America at the B2B Institute, and have had a really long, interesting history in media and in politics and B2B and B2C, and really leading marketing in all facets. So just really excited to have you here, and welcome to the Calgary Marketing Association.
Thank you very much, Mark. Also, it's really tough to come on after you and Derek, because you both have such very lovely, mellow, really nice voices that are kind of calm and soothing. And I think that I'm probably a little bit higher up
That's perfect.
the
You're
octave.
the caffeine to this conversation.
And I'm also very aware, because I'm in London, that there's like a bunch of people on this from 8 o'clock in the morning. So hello, everybody who's here at 8 o'clock your time. Wow, that commitment is impressive. I hope that I at least leave you with one or two things that you will actually really feel change your perspective. Because that's actually what we try to do. As Mark was saying, actually, I've been at LinkedIn for nearly 4 years. And the B2B Institute is a think tank about marketing strategy. And now I've moved into a new role in marketplace innovation with LinkedIn, really looking at the entirety of the emerging B2B universe in a connected way. And we see a huge amount of opportunity. I mean, not the least of which is that B2B is, I think in e-commerce terms, it's a $19 trillion category, and B2C is about a $6 trillion global category. And if we understood B2B marketing more, and we're more successful at it, I think that we would actually unlock huge economic value. So I actually joined LinkedIn from various B2C media roles, and then most recently I was the director of strategy and communications for the Liberal Democrats, which is the third biggest political party in the UK. It can't be more B2C than politics. It's literally you sell one product, everybody buys it one day out of a 4-year cycle, and that's how B2C it is. But the reason I came to LinkedIn and B2B is because I think that there is a completely different opportunity that we don't understand well enough. And so I think that there's a huge amount of economic unlock from better mental models of how things work. And that's really where this piece of work that I want to take you through, which Mark was so very kind about, actually started. What we really want to do is to show you a way of thinking about B2B that's just fundamentally makes the strategic decisions more easy. So this is a piece of work that actually I did with my colleague Jan Schwartz, with Jamie Cleghorn and Andrew Pierce, who are the senior partners in the global B2B practice with Bain and Company. And we had been talking to them because they did a piece of research that we were very interested in called the Day One List, which really says that, basically 80 to 90% of buying decisions are made based on something that is in the Day One List. And this is kind of a very interesting idea because we don't spend a lot of time thinking about, how much of the buying process is sorted before the buyer group get together. And where we really wanted to start to think about was, what is the biggest problem? Like, what's the biggest problem for B2B sellers and marketers? Because if we made some impact there, we'd actually be able to have a really high leverage way of unlocking value. And, for many of you who I think probably are very familiar with B2B, there are lots of things that make B2B challenging. These are very complex purchases. They are generally on quite long time spans. Large numbers of people get involved in one way, shape, or another. And those, I think, are all areas that we're familiar with. But the thing that really struck us was this was a stat from a book called The Jolt Effect by a writer who also wrote a piece for HBR on this about the book's called The Jolt Effect, and he analyzed about 2 million sales calls, and he found out that more than 40% of deals get stuck. They just get stuck, not because the buyers who are looking at various different products can't, don't, that they can't decide that one is not better than the other. The problem is that they just can't come to an agreement. They can't decide that to choose one of the many available vendors is more right than actually doing nothing. So increasingly, especially in a kind of very risk-averse business environment, you get these deals which are basically closed, abandoned, and 40% of deals are stuck because the buyer groups just couldn't get to a decision. So that doing nothing was actually a, a less risky thing than doing something. You really just kick the can down the road and then decide that actually, oh, we'll make that somebody else's problem. And so we started to think about this whole idea of why is it so hard to agree? And how could we potentially think about understanding the process of agreement better so we could actually give marketers some tools and some ideas about how to get to an agreement? And actually, that's really what I want to talk to you today about, how we get buyer groups to agree. Because without an agreement, there is no purchase. And, we spend a lot of time trying to get to specific goals, but really, unless we actually, are confident that all of those efforts, which are considerable in and expensive, if you're a business that has a B2B product or service, you spend a lot of time and you're invested in that. How do we maximize your opportunities of getting the buyer group to agree? And so, in order to think about that, I just want to take a step back so that we can understand sort of why we are where we are. And I think we have like about 100, maybe 120 years of understanding what it is that individual consumers want. We've built brands that send signals to people about the emotional exchange that they will experience when they purchase a product. So, we all have a sense of, Coca-Cola will give you it'll create a moment where you'll feel happy and you'll be with people, and that's the idea of Coca-Cola is synonymous with happiness, with connection. And actually, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but we understand there's a sophisticated exchange between vendor and consumer about what the emotional transformation is going to be. And actually, Coca-Cola do this very well, but loads and loads and loads of brands do this well. If anybody has seen the Jeremy Allen White Calvin Klein underpants ad, just anybody put a tick in the chat if you've seen that. I think he's standing with Brooklyn in the background or something, in his underpants. That is, we don't become Jeremy Allen White when we buy those underpants. Neither does our husband, right? But the sophisticated exchanges, you can dream, you can have like 1/1000th of this daydream if you buy these underpants. If you wear these underpants, you feel just a little bit more like Jeremy Allen White and a little bit less like you in your life. And this is a completely subjective, and some people could even say specious, emotional exchange, except for no emotional exchange is without value. Emotional exchanges are really the value that we have. Now, the challenge in B2B is that we know what the emotional exchange is with Calvin Klein, with Coca-Cola. We know that if as a wife you buy your husband's kind of shaving stuff and you buy Gillette, he might turn into Roger Federer. Maybe he won't, but he might do. We're buying on a whisper and on a dream. But when it comes to the huge and emerging range of B2B products that constitute $19 trillion of economic value every year, we actually just have no idea. We have absolutely no idea who thinks you're sexier if you buy a financial services platform or a cybersecurity platform or the right CRM system. We don't know who marries you. We have no picture in our head for what that emotional exchange actually is. And that's what we found fascinating. And that's where we really wanted to start. Because there's actually one thing in B2B that does make it different. And it does make it different. And this one thing is an unlock to understanding the environment. And that one thing is that B2B decisions are actually group-based decisions. I hope you like the images that are in this deck, which I myself did using a slightly older version. It looks like a very old version of Midjourney now, but I asked it to come up with a buying group for me. When a group of people make a decision together, I mean, even if they were not in a high stakes professional environment, when we're in a car with our families and we want to pick something on some music that everybody wants to hear, we don't pick the music that one person likes the most. We pick the music that people will more or less not hate, which is probably, although not in my family, it's probably why there are lots of cars driving where everyone is listening to Ed Sheeran. It's because we actually make a compromise on what we want to find something that not everybody hates. And there's actually quite a lot of academic research on how group-based decision-making works. Group-based decision-making is not something that we don't know about. We've had about 50 years of understanding how the economic theory of multi-part decision-making within complex information environments, where that road actually leads to. So we have the theory of satisficing. So satisficing was in 1978, Herbert Simon won the Nobel Prize for Economics by coming up with a theory of satisficing, which is saying that human beings, when faced with very complex and incomplete information inputs and outputs, will stop at the point that the decision is just good enough. They actually will not expend extra effort in pursuit of extra value. So have a little think about that. If you think about that for a minute, it's actually quite contrarian to how we believe, or the consensual hallucination of professional life, which is that nobody is allowed to make a decision that's just good enough. You can't really go to your boss and say, yeah, I want to spend $12 million on this thing, and this is good enough, so let's buy it. You have to at least, enact the theatre. There was no stone unturned. We asked 5,000 people. We maximized our opportunity to get this decision exactly right. There's a huge incentive to demonstrate that you made extra effort and extra value. But in fact, that's not what happens. We do not pursue impossible perfection when the situation is too high, because it just becomes, once you go from good enough, impossible perfection, as you can see from the huge amount of extra effort it takes to get, it takes twice as much effort to get 3 or 4 or 5 points of a better outcome. So we also have the behavioral dimension of loss aversion. So loss aversion is a very, I think people would be very familiar with this idea. It's a kind of behavioral, central tenet of behavioral science, which is our fear of losing something, our fear of loss is actually a lot greater, about more than twice as big as our pleasure in something that we get that's actually new. So we have this theory, this kind of practical behavior, which is fear of messing up, is actually much stronger within our decision framework than the fear of missing out. And this happens, I think, in companies more than anywhere, because, if I make a great decision, when I'm buying something and I make the right decision, I just basically doing my job, whatever. Even if I'm right and we have a kind of an 11% increase in efficiency, and we have a 3.5% bump in revenue, that 3.5% bump in revenue does not accrue to me. I might make the decisions that drive the outcomes, but I don't reap the rewards. But when something goes wrong in our professional world, the person who's identified as the decision maker actually carries all the downside. And once you carry the downside, and everybody equally shares in a very amorphous way in the upside, you create an incentive not to mess up, because taking a chance on making a great decision is not worth the risk of making the wrong decision. And we used to work with still very closely Roger Martin, who was the dean of the Rotman School, and he was with P&G for very many years, and he wrote Playing to Win. He has an incredible Medium blog, and he was saying that he advises CEOs all the time. And in fact, the customer promise work that I talked through with Mark, and I think on his podcast before, he was advising Starbucks and Lego, and now they have a customer promise. But he was saying the thing is, from a CEO's perspective, you might have five managers who report to you in your business, and you want them all to grow the business and try and be the best. You actually want them to want to be the best. But really, what the incentive structure supports those to be is not the worst. They just don't want to be fifth out of fifth. If you're fourth out of fifth, third out of fifth, second out of fifth, first out of fifth, you're probably comparatively safe. You just don't want to be fifth out of fifth. So while the CEO might benefit if everybody acted like their life depended on being first, that's actually not, the incentives are misaligned. And so you get behaviors. Behaviors are the concrete outcomes that come from incentives that are misaligned. So we've got loss aversion, and then we've also got my favorite one, which is Gert Gigerenzer from the Max Planck Institute. When he was talking about decision making, he said groups of people don't choose what's best. They choose the least bad option that protects them from negative repercussions. So I actually think that you can actually just stop at reading groups of people don't choose what's best. Why groups of people don't choose best is a really interesting thing for us to evaluate. But we came to this piece of work with some mental models that have been validated that we use to inform our thinking. But having kind of spent, I think just like about a month just reading as much as we could about, the way that B2B buying processes work, and understanding how that kind of process worked either asynchronously in large organizations or in a more kind of sequential way in smaller organizations. We actually wanted to do our own research and kind of develop our own point of view. So what we decided to look at is big technology purchases in big companies. We selected technology purchases in big companies because I really wanted to have a very clear picture at what happens at the large enterprise level, because I just wanted some rules. We may come back to doing this piece of work with a different segment, but I wanted to have one complete and true segment that had, you know, the minimum amount of variance in it. So 64% of our sample were companies of 10,000 plus employees. We covered a bunch of different industries. Just over half our sample were VP level and above, and we did a sample that was in the US and in Western Europe. We actually had a pretty good framing on understanding how very large software purchases were evaluated by buyer groups. And if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation, and it's especially like on the radio, like all these radio shows, for all you lovers out there, right? For all you B2B marketers out there who are under pressure to defend brand spend because your CFO says, I want to put $1 in and get $1.14 out, and that's what my performance guys can do for me. So I'm going to take all your money and give it to them because they're giving me a return on investment that I understand. And I don't know what you're giving me. You're giving me some sort of, you know, consideration is rising in Mercury language, which I don't understand. If you want to make that conversation simple, it's this one stat. We asked our audience, our survey members, to think of one major purchase that they did. And then we said, you know that thing that you bought, right? How many people in the buyer group knew the brand on day one versus how many people didn't? So 81% said, we bought a thing that everybody knew on day one. And only 4% said, yeah, we didn't know the thing that we bought. The experts recommended it and then we bought it. Only 4% actually bought a thing that was recommended by the experts in that domain. So that tells me that you are more than 20 times more likely to be bought if everybody knows you. And not being known on day one is actually almost existential in your chances of being bought. And we actually discussed this with Jamie and Andy and their colleague Jared, who we were talking about, because this was this exactly reproved their day one research, which said they framed the question in a slightly different way. But I was saying, you know, surely it can't just be like, you know, you already know it and then you buy it and then everybody buys it. You go through this whole long process of evaluating everything and then you land exactly almost where you started. And he said, no, it's not really like that. In a way, it's actually worse, because what happens is you start the process with a bunch of vendors that are considered, and the group will consider vendors that they know. And through the discovery process and the learning process and the downloading white paper, actually lots of other vendors that were not on the day one list are actually added to the consideration set. But what happens is there isn't enough consensus to feel good about buying them. And so the buyability, the sense that the buyer group together feel good about it, cannot survive the event horizon of not being very well known. So I want to talk a little bit more than that. But, you know, I know it's 8 o'clock. Some people might have had their coffee. If you've got the camera off and you're having a quiet nap, all I want to say to you is just remember this. You are more than 20 times more likely to be bored if people know you on day one of the process. And that is why brand is the most decisive in B2B and the most influential factor overall in actually being bought. Once we had this kind of moment of clarity, we also wanted to look at what kind of trade-offs buyers are willing to make in order to get to that agreement that we know is the highlight of actually being bought. Without the agreement, the purchase doesn't go ahead. So we said, first of all, imagine if everything is equal. Everything is equal. All things are equal. The price is equal. The product is equal. You know, you think you can do the job. It ticks all the same boxes. Would you choose a well-known vendor or a less well-known vendor? And 3-1, people said, faced with two vendors offering similar products at similar prices, I would reject the less well-known vendor. And that's the first experience you have of this kind of magical intangible, right? When everything is equal, one thing being better known in my buyer group than another has a specific value such that 2/3 of everybody says, you know what? Yeah, we're actually going to choose that. It's more than just a coin toss. It's 2/3 are saying we're really going to choose the well-known one. We're going to reject the other one just because it's less well known. So being less well known is a handicap. Then we were starting to think about what other things can we look at. So we looked at price. So price is a very specific marketing lever, and we think that many decisions are decided on price. But when we spoke to the buyer group, they said that they will pay more for products that their colleagues already know. A better known, more expensive product was easier to agree on than a less well known, cheaper one. Again, almost 3-1, agree or strongly agree versus disagree or strongly agree. So it's not like these are pulling in very different directions. A more expensive product is easier to agree on, right? This idea that the job is to be agreed on and these other facets come into the mix is quite different from the way marketers think that we're going to buy on price. We're actually going to buy this next one is kind of in its own way the most interesting, which is only a minority of people in the buyer group will fight for products that the group don't know, even if their own belief is that the product is better. So again, we have this really stark contrast. A less well-known product was probably better, but it would have been too hard to persuade my colleagues to choose it. And here we really come to the nub of something that is absolutely an explicit emergent property of group-based decision making, which is you have to persuade not only yourself, but other people who are sharing in professional risk to take a risk. We don't take the risk individually and live with the outcomes individually. We do a thing that's very complicated for human beings to do socially. We are hardwired to optimize for the outcomes that make us look good within our local community. And there's no more local or influential community once you move out of like being in a guerrilla family than in a professional group of people who all have different stakes at heart. And it's funny, we actually wrote up some of these results in a blog, and I used to have a slide which was like a group of gorillas, right, kind of sitting around trying looking for all the world as if they were making a decision. And then I showed that at a presentation, and then somebody came up to me, like a woman came up to me from the audience and said, I think people are going to be very offended by your picture of gorillas. And I said, oh, well, you know, it was trying to outline that we have a very, you know, that decision making is not just something that we do as professionals, but we have actually, you know, a lot of biological history. And she was saying, yeah, but people will think that you're saying that gorillas are better at making decisions than B2B buying groups. And I went away and I thought about it. And then I thought, you know what? I think the gorillas might be. I think gorillas actually might be better. They have very fewer, they have a complete clarity about hierarchies, about the power of people who make decisions, about the role and the interconnected roles. And actually, there's a lot of sociological science around how much chimpanzees do role playing. So they pretend to do something in order to get the support of other people in the group. So anyway, I have nothing to say about that. It's no critique of B2B buyers to say that our primate ancestors are also extremely good. So I hope nobody's offended, but I found that a very interesting point of view. A less well-known product is probably better, but it's too hard to persuade my colleagues to choose it. Getting your colleagues to choose something is hard. A key question that we asked in our sample, in our one of our screening questions was, what role do you play in the purchase process? You've told us that you are part of a group-based buying process. You've told us that it was of an amount. There are more than 8 people in the buying group. You've told us the product that you bought. You've told us how much you spent on it. You've told us, who you're actually thinking about. Now, what we'd like to ask you is a self-selecting question, which is about your role within the buying group. Were you actually what we're calling a target buyer, a product expert who was involved in actually being an end user? You have knowledge of the product. You have technical expertise in the category. So you're, the director of IT or the chief information and technology officer, or are you in the purchase process because you are what we call a hidden buyer? So you have influence in the purchase process. You're a purchase process expert. You basically body block your business for financial risk, regulatory risk, sustainability risk, legal risk, financial risk, contractual risk. You're actually a person who decides whether the company that that part of the buyer group wants to do business with is actually a company that's safe to do business with for you. And I actually think of this a bit like it's like I can say this because I'm Indian. Like when you're Bengali and you want to get married, you don't just kind of fall in love and send everybody a bunch of invitations, say show up, where we couldn't be happier to get married. You decide that you want to get married. And then you have to run the gauntlet of the Bengali family buyer group, the uncles, the aunties, all the questions that they want to know. The target buyers are you and your would-be partner. You might fall in love and write poetry and build innovation together in a way that's going to change the category. Hidden buyers don't really care about that. They want to know what are his prospects? Is he stable? Is he financially stable? Is he the market leader? The Bengali question is he a doctor? These are all questions about long-term stability, not short-term viability. Is it true love, or is it infatuation? Does that, is this vendor in it for the long term, or is this just a kind of flashy sales pitch? So hidden buyers and target buyers have quite different roles in a purchase process. And we wanted to find out which has the most influence. So we asked everybody in our survey, we said, you have 100 points. What we would like you to do is to divide those points by the amount of influence they have with the job functions that you think are relevant. And we found that 50-50, almost 51% of people said they said that the influence is 51% target buyers, 49% hidden buyers. Hidden buyers, the people from legal, finance, HR, procurement, have half the decision-making influence. And that's actually very interesting because typically B2B marketers are not spending half of their marketing dollars trying to reach with messaging the people who actually have a huge amount of influence and are high influence members of the buyer group. In fact, they spend a huge amount of money trying to reach target buyers with messaging that does, it does work for target buyers, but target buyers are only half the story. There's actually a whole other half of the story. It's like in Lost, like there's a buyer group on the other side of the island, and you've got to actually be bought by them as well. So we were very interested in how hidden buyers actually make decisions. And one of the things that we found was that hidden buyers are much more influenced by brand than even target buyers. And it kind of makes sense because as a target buyer, it's not awareness that you have of brands. You have deep salience. You know exactly which of the 20 vendors in your category you might be better off for a particular use case. You have a deep knowledge in the product, which is not from, they sponsored a Super Bowl advert or a Formula One car. Whereas hidden buyers are really just working out, is this business legit? Are they someone we can trust? Are they going to get financing? Have they got 56 people pursuing them with legal claims? And so having brand equity around being trusted and being something that they believe in, because in B2B, brand strength is a proxy for other people bought this product and are still alive to tell the tale. You're 27% more likely, if you're a hidden buyer, to buy if you know the vendor on day one. You're 30% more likely to reject a vendor that you don't know than target buyers. And you're nearly twice as likely to reject a vendor that people do not know. If people in your group don't know, then the least aware of the depth of knowledge of the category and the depth of product knowledge, the least aware are the most risk averse. If other people don't know it, not going to get past us. And that, I think, is a very other, that's a way of thinking that that is new to the way that we think about. And actually, hidden buyers reject more than half of shortlisted vendors. If you think how hard it is to get onto the shortlist, to get onto a shortlist requires a huge amount of marketing activity. And sometimes, because often in marketing, by the time you get onto the shortlist, you're kind of like, that's where your marketing qualified lead stops at the water's edge. And then your sales qualified lead picks up. But really, you actually need to understand that you need to build brand as a full funnel deal closing motion with hidden buyers all the way from consideration to purchase. And by the way, half the shortlisted vendors get lost on that track, that they are actually the key to the final step of actually being bought. So we do have this idea that hidden buyers reject more than half of shortlisted vendors. And we have this idea about this idea of group consensus, the idea that a group of people knowing something gives me permission to believe that their knowledge is enough for me to give them their vote. And in marketing, to be fair, we actually do have a concept that wraps around, and we call it brand. The trouble with brand is not that it doesn't work, it's that many different people interpret brand differently, and marketing has a kind of love-hate with brand because we've decided to pit it against performance, which is actually the nonsense in which so many B2B marketers really struggle. You need both. Brand is a deal closing motion at every stage in the buying process, and buyers are looking to brands for that sense of safety. So if we had to think about how we might apply that, we're not here to say that if you're, the biggest brands will get bought because they're biggest brands. They will always find it easy. But if you are maybe, 10th in a category, how do you build an unfair advantage and do strategic activity to actively mimic that same sense of being known and being aware? And that's actually what this piece of research is. The piece of research that I'm currently doing, which I'm just getting preliminary results, but is really exciting. Brand needs to be better defined so that we understand the job it does, moving from consideration to purchase, And we can find out more about that, but we already can see that it actually does determine outcomes. And actually, salespeople will always tell you that, oh yeah, it's much easier to go into the room if you're Microsoft than it is to go into the room if you're Sugarpuff CRM, or if you're Goldman Sachs, you're going to be invited into the room when you want to sell your business, whereas Mimi, Mark, and Derek's cash shop is probably not going to be, because we don't have the brand that people believe in. So what does that mean in terms of creative? I created this just to give you an example of the kind of creative that we very often see. Or actually, sometimes we see a lot more boring creative than this. But really, you can be innovative, you can be a maverick. This is the kind of, look at the bells and whistles and all of my technical kit. That's what's going to make you a winner. Actually, in our survey, more than 74% of the survey said they'd seen this or creative very like this. What they saw a lot less of is the kind of creative that sends a message of reassurance. You can sleep like a baby when you hire Acme CRM. We're going to look after you. We've got your back. You don't have to worry. A part of the conversation being around risk mitigation, and you don't have to worry because when you buy this, we understand what your problems are. That's a kind of idea that isn't manifested in B2B creative in a way that, if it were, it would actually reach both the hidden and the target buyers. The innovation messaging that I showed you is straightforwardly absolutely right for target buyers, but absolutely not as useful for hidden buyers, because they have no interest in understanding whether they do not run the slide rule over whether you are innovative. They run the slide rule over whether you're a brand that my colleagues have heard of, whether you're trusted, whether people say good things about you. All sorts of subjective considerations come into their point of view. So if I were to ask you, what is the most famous unofficial tagline in the whole history of B2B marketing? I'm going to give everyone like 25 seconds to put into the chat what you think that might be. The most famous unofficial tagline. It's actually quite a lot easier to do this in a room. I'll give you like 10 seconds to think about it, and then I'll move to the next slide. I want to see at least some people try. When I say it, you'll feel like you know it. What's the single most famous unofficial tagline in the whole history of B2B? Okay, we're just going to move to the big reveal, which is nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. It's not what IBM said. And it wasn't really the kind of what the tech nerds in tech businesses wanted to buy. They wanted to buy something a lot more, exciting and, high growth and, with much more of an opportunity. But nobody ever got fired for buying IBM became the de facto line because it identified one thing, which is in B2B marketing and selling, and in marketing, marketers and sellers want to sell all sorts of stuff. They want to sell all sorts of stuff. But you know what buyers in B2B buying groups want to buy? They want to buy not getting fired. B2B buyers want to get not getting fired. And if we can understand that, if we can actually add that to our unmet needs model, which we're much more comfortable with in a B2C world, I want to believe I'm sexy is a very unmet need that B2C advertising has really understood. It's, I I don't turn into Eva Longoria, even if I buy whatever that Revlon thing is, or the because I'm worth it, whatever it is. I don't turn into that. But, I give it a moment of my consideration, and like $20, the amount of $20 people have spent, $20 to $100 that women spend on the promise is like a gigantic industry. I want to buy something that has real intrinsic value for me. And nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. Is really, really explicit about what that value exchange is. And actually, that was the jump off point for the next piece of research, which I'm also very excited about. So just to wrap up before we take some questions, 3 things that you want to take away. One is B2B buying is group-based buying. If you don't have the group-based filter on, it's very difficult for even the marketing activity that you think you can track and trace and evaluate in MQLs is not going to get you to as good a result. Actually, building brand familiarity with the buyer group is the best way to maximize your chances of being bought. The big brands do it by accident, not by trying to do it intentionally. But if you're a smaller or a mid-sized brand, you're actually much better able to think about actively and strategically manufacturing that sense of familiarity. And you don't have to boil the ocean. If you're number 9 in a category, or if you're number 11 in a category, you're really competing with 8, 9, and 10, and 12, 13, and 14. That's actually your competitive set. You might think that your competitive set is number 1 in the category, but your competitive set is much more, where you have 30 to 35% of a competitive set of a TAM. That's your competitive set. And within that group, you can actively and strategically build familiarity with a broad group of people who, if they believe in your business, will actually have a huge amount of influence. The whole buyer group has influence. Hidden buyers, who are mostly overlooked, have, I would say, outsized influence. And wherever you think about offering marketing advice and messaging, understand that really what you're facing is the emotional and professional stakes involved with being part of a buyer group. And that is potentially highly, highly correlated with exactly what is the best for the business. But let's say the correlation is not as high as you think. The better outcome to program your activities towards is understanding the emotional and professional stakes involved for the buyer, even more than the outcomes for the buying company. So on that note, I will leave you with this one thought, which is, marketers and sellers think that they have lots of jobs, many more jobs, and actually with every wave of technology, the job becomes more complex. But if we think about it in a simpler way, marketers in B2B have one job, and the real job of marketers is to help the buyer group to agree, to deliver the marketing activities that are maximizing the opportunity of getting buyers to actually agree. On which note, I'm going to stop sharing and would love to kind of get a sense of how this landed with you and what people thought. Even before we get questions, I just love to kind of get some feedback from Mark and maybe from Derek and from in the chat how things work, and then we'll take some of the questions.
Mimi, this is awesome. There's so many great insights. I have copious notes. I'm furiously writing. There's so many great things in here. I mean, there's also one of the ahas for me was, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the 595 rule, but as you were talking about the hidden buyers and target buyers, it occurred to me that there's maybe overlap or parallels between that model of 595 and then, or the cash flow funnel that B2B has.
Yeah.
The B2B Institute has with, it's funny, you can get super focused on the people that are just like, who is the actual buyer? And there might be 2 or 3 or 4 of them or 5 of them. But then when you think about the entire buying group, 8, 10, 15, who knows sometimes in these organizations.
Sometimes 23. I mean, there's one thing that we do is add more people to the buyer group in order to think that we're mitigating the risk.
Right.
But the thing is, I mean, even having a mindset that there are hidden buyers who are reached by broad targeted, trust-based messaging that says, you're a safe partner for my business, adding that to your, your marketing strategy and objectives will actually drive the kind of
Mhm.
outcomes that are needed in any environment where you have procurement, legal, and finance in the room. And it's otherwise marketing is just like having it's like having a really amazing Italian shoe. Um, However beautiful one shoe is, two crappy shoes are still slightly better in terms of if you have to run a race. And that's how we
Yeah.
think. I know there are some questions in the chat, so do you
Yeah.
want to kind
There's
of
one here from Adita about how do brands break through the clutter. There's lots of
Yes.
advertising and messaging. So yeah,
Of
maybe.
course, of course, of course. So I think there's cluster. This is not about boiling the ocean, and this is supposed to be strategically helpful for not the biggest. The biggest, being the biggest Nipo brands. It's like being Paris Hilton. You're like famous from the beginning. There are, if your parents are rich and good looking, like that song says, things are going to work out well for you. But how do you cut through the clutter? Is to understand who you're really competing with. What really is your competitive set? Who are the 20 or 200 businesses that you and five other competitors that are actually going after? And within that group, how do you reach those people? What job titles? Like within LinkedIn, you can target on job title, you can target by company. There's a group of people that you need to find out. And cutting through the clutter, I would actually reframe it as, you have to reach people who matter in a way that they can remember a message that you have. And that message has got to be, or at least some part of your messaging strategy has got to be about trust. Our business is trustworthy rather than just about the product, because there's a bunch of people who actually don't care about the product and who are not visible in the digital ecosystem either. They're not downloading a white paper. We call them hidden buyers because they're not actually visible in the ecosystem that we look at. So the ecosystem that we look at is half the picture, but there's another half of the picture that we're not looking at. It's like dark matter.
There's one here from Lindsay about in legal B2B marketing. When selecting a product or a vendor, lawyers would almost always want to purchase what the competitor firms purchased. Any thoughts on that?
Say that what they're looking for is very, very clear, which is what cues are we really looking for when we buy something, which is a successful business like us bought it and it worked well for them. So if our competitors are buying something, and they seem to be doing well, we are, that biases our point of view. And I would say that, um, as with politics, everything is contextual. When you're a smaller party, everything, you don't change the world. The world changes because people around you do different things. So for for um, for cutting through the clutter, it's understand your competitive set. For why do people buy things like us? It's because why do we want to buy the things that people like us buy? Is because we think on a deep level that that's going to work for them, and if it works for them, we can't afford for it to not work for us. And we feel that they've made a choice that makes it easier for us to make that choice. And it's easier. We're satisficing when we see companies like us do something. We think, oh well, we should do that too. So I think that is the answer to the question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, hey, because even in B2C, like let's say the home builder industry, like all the other home builders do the exact same thing as the other home builder, right? They're like, oh, this person's doing solar panels. We're going to want to do solar panels, and we're going to use a similar product that the other home builder uses. So I actually had one question around um, um, kind of like the best kept secret positioning, right? There's a lot of companies in B2B who are just like, we're the best kept secret of whatever that is. Um, I'm curious about what you think about marketing your brand beyond just your ICP, just to get more well known. It's kind of a funny question, but is that a tactic, would you say, that we could use to help push that brand?
Yes, I think brand matters. A general level of awareness, even if it's not salience, um, is the thing that will get you over the people who don't know you, right? There are people in the room who know you very, very well, and there are people in the room who don't know you. And I think you have to understand that the group-based purchase decision requires an agreement, which means that you need the people who know you least to also vote for you. Um, and so in that case, that the ICP that's how you get into the consideration set. And I think that in B2B, the kind of distance between consideration and purchase is where we think performance, price-based messaging or offer-based messaging is what actually works in that. I actually think that what we're starting to see is that there is a completely different discipline of trust-based brand activation in a very targeted way with those people who are at that time in a buying cycle, as opposed to the 95% who are out of market. There is a job of brand to convince out of market people, but also inside, case studies, recommendations, things that matter for the things that people like you have chosen, the lawyers who chose something, they maximize the chance that other people like them are also going to want to buy them. So I think that there is a whole set of marketing levers that you can pull to get you from consideration to purchase. Marketing doesn't stop there, just another form of marketing sits on top of sales activity. And sales activity is really what currently works between consideration and purchase. We think that marketing has a powerful role to play around like a kind of almost programmatic approach to trust-based, recommendation-based, relationship-based, relatability-based brand messaging, which happens in a different part of the process from the top of funnel that we think is where brand lives. In B2B, brand lives all the way down the funnel, way to closing.
Oh, interesting. I think I know we're at time, and I can see there's people dropping off. So, Mimi, so grateful for your time. This is so amazing, this work, and your insights are fantastic, and the way you deliver is great. So, really appreciate everything that you've done and shared with us today. So, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, guys, and I will let you go off and have your breakfast. And I hope it's a wonderful day. I hope you have a wonderful day.